Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we are going through the book of Job. And this week we are going to be in Job chapter 27. Now, right now, we are in the middle of one of Job's long speeches. From chapter 26 clear to chapter 32. It's just going to be Job speaking right here. And right now, we're in the middle of one of Job's long speech. Now, right here at the beginning of chapter 27, it says, moreover. It almost seems like Job gave an opportunity for one of his three friends to speak, and it would have been Zophar's turn to kind of keep the same routine going, but it seems like they didn't take their opportunity to speak, so now Job just keeps talking. So, we're in the middle of one of Job's speech here. Let's get out our Bibles. Let's follow along. Job chapter 27, verse 1. Moreover, Job continued his discourse and said, that's why I say it seems like he gave a spot for one of his friends to speak there, and they didn't take it. So he keeps going. Verse 2. This is Job speaking, and he says, as God lives. Now I'm going to stop right there because this is kind of interesting. As God lives. Job just made an oath. And taking an oath was a serious matter in the Old Testament. It was basically inviting God to kill you if what you said wasn't true. And it's interesting. We see this oath all the time throughout the Old Testament, as the Lord lives. It's actually 36 times in the Old Testament. We find many people. King David said it all the time. Elijah, Elisha, all the greats said it. Jeremiah. And why did they do this? Well, it was actually okay. Deuteronomy 6:13 says, you shall fear the Lord your God and serve him, and by his name you shall swear. So, like I said, there are 36 examples throughout the Old Testament of people using this oath. But then it's interesting. Jesus came along, and in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, do not swear by heaven or by earth or by any other throne. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. I think what Jesus is saying is that we should always be telling the truth. We shouldn't have to swear that we are actually telling the truth this time. People should just expect us to tell the truth. We shouldn't have to go, oh, I swear on my mother's life, this actually is true. No, people should just expect us to tell the truth. It's interesting. We find one time in the Old Testament that this really backfired. And it's when King David said it. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 5. But right after King David had his affair with Bathsheba, impregnated her, had her husband killed and took her in, the prophet Nathan came in. And the prophet Nathan gave David this parable where he said there was this great man, rich man with lots of livestock, lots of flocks, and there was this poor man with one little ewe lamb. And a traveler came in and wanted a lamb, and the rich man wouldn't take anything from his own herd, but just took that one little ewe lamb from that man and gave it to him. And when King David heard this, he said, as the Lord lives, that man shall surely die. Then do you remember what Nathan told him? He said, that man was you, David. So King David said, as the Lord lives, that man shall die. And then Nathan says, that man was you, David. So also, going back to Jesus' days, Jesus said, do not swear by heaven or by earth or by any other throne. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. We find it in the New Testament that the Pharisees were actually kind of using these oaths. They were being deceitful with their oaths. They would say, whoever swears by the temple, that's nothing. But if you swear by the gold on the temple, then you're obliged to perform it. It's almost like the Pharisees had a cop-out. They'd be like, oh, my fingers were crossed. So what I said really didn't mean anything. So Job here makes an oath, and I probably spent way too much time talking about that right there. But let's keep going. Job says, as God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. Job says, God has made my soul bitter. Now, this is almost kind of the very same words that we find Naomi saying in the book of Ruth. Remember when she'd lost her husband and her two sons, and she said, no longer call me Naomi, but call me, I forgot. I think it's Mara or Mara, which means bitter. Naomi said, God has made me bitter here. Here's something we need to remember. Job has went through a tough situation, has he not? Lost all his children, lost all his wealth. He's sitting in an ash heap. But we have to remember this. God is in control of everything. God's sovereign, all-knowing, all-powerful God. He knows all things. God is in control of everything. So if God allows something to happen, would it not be logical to say that he can also comfort us in that trial? A lot of times I go back to Paul's thorn in the flesh. which we find in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We don't know what his thorn in the flesh was. It could have been his eyes. We really don't know. But Paul said, concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that he would take it away. Now, in our thinking, we would think, Lord, if you would just take this problem away from me, I could serve you a lot better, Lord. And I know that you're worried about me and only want the best for me. And that, God, you should take this away. But you know what God said? No, can't do it. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Probably not the answer Paul was wanting. Now, why is that? We have to think about this. Our thorns in our flesh, and we all have them, they're what cause us to cry out to God. So would God want to take away the very thing that caused us to lean so hard on him? I don't know. It's also interesting. In the book of James, he says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Are we really supposed to count it all joy when we have problems in this life? I do think that it makes us long towards heaven and look forward to spending eternity with him, a time when there will be no more sorrow and no more pain. I don't know. That's it. So Job says, the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. Job's suffering right now. Let's keep going here. Verse 3. As long as my breath is in me and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Here's a good man verse right there, isn't it? Job says, far be it from me that I should say you are right. There's our rule. Never admit when you're wrong, right? Let's keep going here. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. Now, can we say, as Job did here, that I always did what was right? Job spoke as one who had a clear conscience before God. Job was one who could look back and say, I served God in sincerity. I always did my best. I always tried to put him first in everything. And, Job had a clear conscience here. Paul had a clear conscience too. He would say this many times. He would say, I serve God, thanks be to the Lord God, whom I serve with a clear conscience to this day. Paul said that many times. Can we say that we serve God with a clear conscience? Can we come boldly before the throne of grace? We have to ask ourselves that. I think a good rule that we can have is in all our actions, would we be okay with them being on the front page of the local paper for everybody to see? That's a good rule of thumb. I think one other thing we can think about right here with Job is this. Job is holding on to the only thing that he has left. And what is that? His relationship with God. It's what keeps martyrs, missionaries, preachers, pastors. It's what keeps them going. It's the one thing that they have left, their relationship with God. When everything else in this life is stripped away, if you still have your relationship with God, you still have everything. Let's keep going here. Verse 7. May my enemy be like the wicked. Now, who is Job? Is Job referring to his friends as his enemies here? I'm not sure. But may my enemy be like the wicked, and he who rises up against me like the unrighteous. Now, what Job is actually going to say here, in our mind, it almost sounds kind of cruel. It almost sounds contradictory to what Jesus told us on the Sermon on the Mount. What did Jesus tell us? Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Jesus said, bless your enemies. Paul said it in Romans chapter 12. He said, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. And Job here is saying, may my enemies be like the wicked. I want them struck down. But we have to remember something here. Job hadn't heard the Sermon on the Mount yet. He hadn't heard the teachings of Jesus. And Job the Mosaic law didn't even exist yet for Job. So I think what he's saying is right. But this kind of brings up another question I hear all the time. Is the God of the Old Testament different than the God of the New Testament? Has anybody ever said that around you? People say, well, the God of the Old Testament is just a God of wrath, and the God of the New Testament is a God of love, and we have to love our enemies. No, that's not true. It's all the same God. Malachi 3:16 says this, I am the Lord. I do not change. Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's the same God throughout the whole Bible. It's, just Jesus was manifested in the flesh. That's God in the flesh. We see a God of love in the Old Testament all the time. Take the book of Jonah, for example. Jonah was sent to preach a message to the Assyrians, the wicked Assyrians, the very ones who are going to ransack the northern 10 tribes of Israel, overtake them and put them into captivity. And what did Jonah have to do? God expected Jonah to go preach to those wicked people. But even in the New Testament, we see wrath all the time. Take the book of Revelations, or take what happened to Ananias and Sapphira. So it's the same God throughout the whole Testament with the same message. Let's keep going here. Where are we at? Verse 8. For what is the hope of the hypocrite? Though he may gain much if God takes away his life. What is a hypocrite? We hear this word all the time. A hypocrite, Webster's dictionary defines it as this: one who claims to have moral standards in which one's behavior does not conform. Yeah, so Christians all the time are being accused of being hypocrites, are we not? Now, the term hypocrite, it's actually derived from a Greek term for actor, or one who wears a mask. And I think there are actually two types of hypocrites. There's one who professes beliefs and then acts another way. Then there's the other who looks down on others, for which we ourselves also do. It's interesting. Jesus condemned the hypocrites all the time. He said this about the hypocrite. He said, they draw near to me with their mouth and draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. He also referred to the hypocrites as whitewashed tombs. On the outside, they look gorgeous and beautiful, but on the inside, they're full of dead men's bones. The interesting thing is Jesus never once referred to any of his disciples as hypocrites. Do you know who he always referred to the hypocrites as? The religious elites, the religious zealots who thought they had it all figured out. Now, going back to Christians being referred to as hypocrites a lot, I can see where it comes from, but we have to remember this. We all sin. We all fall short of the glory of God. We all fail to live up to the standards of the Bible. Now, hopefully, as we walk with the Lord, we keep progressing and getting better in our walk towards sanctification. But even the Apostle Paul said, not that I've already obtained or already perfected, but I press on. So we all fail to live up to the standards. We are human, but there are a lot who genuinely seek God in everything they do. There are people who live their lives free from scandals and are blameless in this world. And we have to remember this: making a mistake is not the same as being a hypocrite. We're all going to make mistakes. All right, let's keep going here so we can get done in time. Verse 8, for what is the hope of the hypocrite? Though he may gain much, if God takes away his life. That's kind of like, what Jesus said. What should it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? Will God hear his cry when trouble comes upon him? Will he delight himself in the Almighty? Will he always call on God? When does a hypocrite call on God? The hypocrite calls on God only when he's in trouble. What Job is talking about here is having a relationship with God, one who calls out to God at all times. It's interesting. I heard this just the other week, that there were two people in the Bible who it says walked with God. Does anybody know who they were? Enoch and Noah. I believe, you can check me on this, but I believe it's Enoch and Noah are the only two in the Bible where it says they walked with God. Now, walking with God, that's an interesting statement. It doesn't mean that you just go have a chat with him, went for a jog, let's go have our hour with God at church for the week and be done. No. When you walk with God, it's a committed, everyday type thing where you're just checking in all the time. As Paul said, rejoice always, pray without ceasing. That's a walk with God. Let's keep going here. Verse 11, I will teach you about the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Job's friends have been trying to teach him. Job turns around and says, guess what? I'm going to tell you guys about God because I know more than you do. Verse 12, surely all of you have seen it. Why then do you behave with complete nonsense? Job's really calling him out right here. What you are saying is complete nonsense. Verse 13, this is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage of oppressors received from the Almighty. If his children are multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Now, this is interesting that Job said that, because what happened to Job's children? They all died. But we also see this in the Bible that's happened to the wicked men before. Remember, Haman made the vows in the book of Esther, and who ended up hanging on them? Haman and all his sons. In the book of First Kings, I believe, Ahab had 70 sons. Do you remember what happened to those 70 sons? They were all killed by Jehu. So, verse 14. If his children are multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those who survive him shall be buried in death, and their widows shall not weep. This is what Job's saying about the wicked man. He's saying their widows won't even weep. Now, if your wife would be happy that you're gone, you have a problem. You need to work on that. Verse 16. Though he heaps up silver like dust and piles up clothing like clay, he may pile it up, but the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. He builds his house like a moth, like a booth with which a watchman makes. Now, if you go by NIV or NLT, it sounds a lot different. I don't even know what that means in the King James here, like a booth with which a watchman makes. Verse 19, the rich man will lie down, but not be gathered up. He opens his eyes, and he is no more. Terror overtakes him like a flood. A tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls against him and does not spare. He flees desperately from its power. Men shall clap their hands at him and shall hiss him out of his place. What Job is saying here is like, guys, I know my situation looks like judgment from God, but I can assure you it isn't. All right, we're done with chapter 27. We're getting closer and closer to the end of the book of Job. It keeps getting better and better, except for there's 4 chapters in which Elihu is going to talk. And I was reading one commentator this week that said they're about the most 4 boring chapters in the Bible. But we'll get there. We'll get through it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.